Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you to our work session / town hall this evening on school safety. My name is John Mass, and I'm Governing Board President. This is an actual work session style meeting of the Governing Board for Lake Havasu Unified School District Number 1. And we'll start off a little bit out of order. We want to recognize a few people that we had invited. First and foremost, buried in his phone is Senator Borelli. I'd like to thank you for coming this evening. Thank you. We've got 3 of our city council members here with us this evening, since Gordon's already standing. Hey, Gordon. Gordon Grote. We also have Michelle Lynn. And we have Donna McCoy. The purpose of our meeting tonight is to kind of give you an overview of what the school district does. We obviously can't get into real fine details. The one thing I will tell you is the governing board is the policy makers. We're the ones that equip the toolkit. We're not the ones that decide how the toolkit gets laid out and used. So any suggestions that you have, we may want to add to the toolkit through policy, but it doesn't mean that necessarily that our administrative team working with police and fire will roll that out. And so with that said, we're going to open our meeting with a moment of silent prayer and reflection. Terry, will you call the roll, please? And if you'll stand with me and join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I will entertain a motion to review and accept the agenda for the session. Terry? And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Desire, who will start us off with our school safety town hall.
Thank you, President Mazda and members of the board. We actually would like to start out with a little bit of information. We have with us this evening our guests, Chief Dan Doyle of our police department and Chief Brian Davis of our fire department. And so Chief Doyle is going to start us out with a little bit of information, and we'll be going through the agenda, giving information on each of the topics, and then we'll be opening it up to the floor for questions and comments.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to address a number of the things that are in the agenda, but kind of in my own order. And a lot of times people want to hear about what is the police department's response to a threat at the school or a threat anywhere. And to begin, I actually brought one of my unit sergeants with me, and I'm going to embarrass him a little bit and introduce him. Sergeant Brian Jacobs, he's our sergeant of our street crimes unit. And I brought him along because he can be helpful afterwards with questions and such. His unit really spearheads a lot of these issues, and he also works with our local churches and different groups, helping to establish safety plans and in the collaboration with the police department. When it comes to our schools, the police department really focuses on about 4 things when we talk about these type of situations. Is we look at prevention, education, detection, diversion, response to an actual threat, and then what do we do after the fact. I think that beyond just the response, because a lot of people want to know, well, what do you do when there's a threat? Well, obviously I'm not going to give you the specifics of our tactics and what we do, but I think most important, and I know we have a lot of educators in the room, is what's most important is what do we do beforehand? What do we do as far as prevention, education, and early detection of individuals that could be a threat to others? So some of the things that we do on the prevention side is obviously we have school resource officers assigned full-time to our middle school and to our high school. They have a number of responsibilities there, not only to teach some of our programs, and one of our programs being the NOVA program, where we do focus and teach lessons on anger management, aggression, bullying, and a number of those things that, factors that lead into problems. But they have a responsibility to be interacting with the students, learning the students, and looking for those ones that could potentially be a threat, or those that are exhibiting signs that could be of concern to us. Now, obviously, our next goal is once we do kind of identify somebody that could be going down the wrong path, is we've detected that. What can we do on diversion? What can we do with this person? As you've seen in some of the more recent threats that we've had, we take the threats very seriously. It's not a normal thing for a student to make a threat against the school. I'm not talking about two students get in a shoving match. I'm not talking about, but when a student makes a direct threat against the school, and obviously this headlined the issues here most recently, is that is not normal behavior to make that type of threat. We take those very seriously, and by jumping in, not blowing it off, not saying kids will be kids, but taking it seriously, getting them in, and finding out what is the problem. Why is this young person making this kind of threat? What's happening in their life? What can we do to divert them and possibly interrupt that path, because they're obviously going down the wrong path. If you really take a look at all the incidents that have happened around the United States, virtually every one of them, when they look back and they said all the signs were there, all the clues were there, the indicators were there. When a student is posting YouTube videos identifying himself as a professional school shooter, when they are using online monikers of school shooter, when they're making threats to other students that they're going to come in and they're going to shoot up the school. These are things that we've seen what's happened in other areas. We've seen when these things have been ignored, and we don't do that here. Our school district doesn't ignore these threats. The police department doesn't ignore them. When we identify these individuals, the idea is we're not here. We don't want to necessarily throw these kids in prison for the rest of their life. What we want to do is we want to get them help, and the best way we can do that is get them in somewhere where we can mandate via the court system, that we can mandate that they receive counseling, that we can legally monitor, and we can actually legally force them to do the counseling. So many times with these type of individuals, the home life isn't exactly what it should be. So we can't really rely on, call in the parents and say, your student's a threat, and would you do something about it, please? We don't do that. We're not going to do that. I know our school district's not going to do that. You make that type of threat, that is a illegal act. We're going to get you in the system, and we're going to try to get you the help and avoid the situation. If all of these things don't work, and God forbid that we should ever find ourselves in a bad situation or a incident of violence in our schools, we do collaborate. I mean, obviously all our educators here know the level of collaboration that goes on between the school district, the police department, the fire department, and hospital, and everybody else that would be involved. But that's really critical, is that we're all working together and establishing what we're going to do, the response, that the teachers know what to do, the schools have a plan in place, and that we know what that plan is and what our response is going to be. We train regularly at our schools here during the summertime. The school district allows us access to the schools so that we can come in and do our annual training here in the schools. It allows our officers to really learn the layouts of the schools. It also allows us to really focus on scenario-based training, which I'm a real advocate of scenario-based training to make it as realistic as possible. We've incorporated staff from the school district into that training, representatives from security, representatives of some of the teaching staff, and we're going to continue in those efforts. Then obviously we also have to deal with what do we do in the aftermath of all these, and some of the things that we've learned, and I know if any parents that are out there, is each time these things have happened, we've learned something about communication, and that's something. The communication factor is very difficult, and we've worked in each of these incidents. We've worked with the schools, and we're evolving the communication system on how to get the word out as quickly as we can, because if parents are scared, they don't know if they should send their children to school. Unfortunately, we live in a day of social media where everybody wants to be up to the minute every second, and sometimes we just can't do that. That we are actively investigating something, and we don't necessarily have the information to release. And in those cases, that we always ask the community, have some faith in the school and the staff at the school, and some faith in us that we would never. And I know the school, and dealing with all the staff at the school, there's not one staff member at the school that would allow that school to be open if we felt there was a credible threat or the students were not going to be safe in that school. So that's something I'm very confident. I had 2 boys in our school district, 1 still in the school district, and I, for one, am extremely confident in the capabilities of our school staff and their safety. So obviously dealing with that, and then the aftermath comes that communication, and what do we do after. So we do have plans in place for that, and I've probably used up more than my 10 minutes of time, and with that, I will hand the mic.
Yield the balance of the time. Thanks, Dan. Excuse me. Well, thanks. I have to say it's encouraging to see all of you here, and thank you to the board and to the district staff. Dan and I were very happy to kind of get involved in this. In terms of the fire department, there's probably that piece that everybody is familiar with, and that part that they are expect. But there's a couple pieces that go along with that. There's kind of 3 attempts or 3 angles that we take in our managing of the things here with the police department. I want to say that I also brought my resident expert. If you can stand up, Scott. Scott Hartman, the fire marshal. Scott's here. Afterwards, if you have technical questions, Scott is the one that would answer them. And I trust in him to be that, like I said, that resident expert. So our first angle is that response to the school every day. Everyone's used to that. They dial 911. You see us in the schools. Engine 4 is seated up in the back. They're up the hill from the high school here. So that's who you would see here. Thanks to Captain Blumenkamp for bringing his crew down here, and to BC Bracamani for joining us this evening. Thank you. That's it. Yeah, give him a round of applause. That's that piece that we all anticipate. You dial 911, will show up. It's that routine incident, and everyone's accustomed to that piece of it. The second piece of that is kind of that follow-up with Dan's approach. The truth of the matter is we kind of switched it up and let Dan go first, because as I expect recent events probably have people a little concerned about maybe some specific topics this evening, and I thought it was important to make sure we highlight what the police department does here, because it's very important. Our role at that point is to then back up what they're doing. We are going to go hand in hand with them, but we deeply rely on the police department when it comes to those real critical incidents, and quite frankly, we do that on a regular basis on any number of calls. So it is really a good partnership, and you can trust the fact that the departments work very well together. I will say, in terms of those critical incidents, and I think the events in Vegas probably highlighted some of these to us. Maybe this evening I think we're going to talk about run, hide, fight, and maybe some stop the bleed. Those are kind of some things that we really hope that the community focuses on, the students focus on, the district focuses on, and the teachers focus on, so that we can try to, God forbid, as Dan said, if that situation arises, we can really respond and not overwhelm our system. We are quite a ways away from the rest of the world, if you will. So we understand with some lessons in Vegas just how easily we can become overwhelmed. So we try to mitigate that and manage that, and I think we're prepared. As Dan said, I think we have good plans. The final piece of that is that piece that nobody thinks about, and if you ask Scott, he could give you probably a 30-minute discussion on the fact that no one realizes he's out there. But that's that other piece of the puzzle that the fire department does that kind of goes hand in hand with the building department, and that's prevention. And really all of the pieces that make all of the buildings in town safe, schools obviously being one of them. But you were able to enter this evening safely, you can exit safely, there's safeguards in place in this building, and we can trust in the fact that as a nation, as a state, as a city, we have good systems and policies and procedures in place on how we build things and how we prepare to handle some of those things. If something happens outside, a storm or anything else, and you need to shelter in this building, I have confidence that it will do that. At the same token, if there's a need for us to exit, we can do that quickly. And so I think there are a lot of those pieces that sometimes we don't always understand, I promise I won't unleash Scott on you, because he's very passionate about that, but for good reason. You know, those are those pieces that we really don't think about, and over decades of situations driving those decisions, that's really how we get to where we are today. So that's my piece of it, and I think I'm handing it back.
My role is to speak a little bit this evening about what is it that we do in the school district to prepare for safety and to prepare for the unthinkable, should that ever occur in our community. And so there are some things that we do. We have a safety plan. We have a safety plan that is not public because it's not out there for anybody who is thinking about attacking a school setting to have access to what our responses would be. But we do work annually with the fire department, with the police department, to develop and revise that plan, to practice the plan, and to ensure that it's updated with all of what we're learning as we continue to have, unfortunately, incidences of violence. We also have worked with our Homeland Security checklist. I have a picture of what that looks like. I don't know that people are aware of this, but each of our schools has gone through a Homeland Security checklist, and the categories you can see on the screen that we look at are things like access control, things like their building exterior and interior. How is it designed for access? How is it designed to protect students and protect staff? Those are the kinds of things that are on there, and you can see there's a whole list of procedures there. And so we do spend time looking at our facilities, analyzing them, making updates, and have just done that again this year. Another area that we've worked on as a district is our entire administrative team and several of our counselors and psychologists have gone through what is called threat assessment training. And although the chief talked a little bit about the fact that we take every threat seriously, we also know that there are a lot of statements that are made that could be inferred as threats, but those are not necessarily the kinds of threats that students are going to carry through. And so what threat assessment training does is it trains us how to actually analyze every threat we get and determine whether the student has made a threat or whether they pose a threat, which is something that is a little bit different. And the police department works with us carefully on that. But the chief is right. There are indicators out there in almost every case that there has been a student who has attacked a school. There have been pre-indicators to that process. And so getting information early and then analyzing that information is critical for prevention. Those are the biggest things that we do. We do a lot of drills. I'm going to actually go back to my slide that had the list. We work with our staff for training. We work with our students in training, and we have more to do in that regard. Mr. Masden, would you like me to continue with the remaining items on the agenda for information? Yes. As we talk about the other areas within our school district that we look at, one of the areas is physical access to schools. As we've been having discussion about access to our schools, and this is an area that we do want community input and feedback, is our schools need to be welcoming and they need to be safe places for students. So we want them to be deterrents to aggressors, but we also want them to be a place where you all feel comfortable coming in and out, where your children feel safe, and where we are embedded and integrated within our community. As we've been looking at physical access to our schools and doing our security checklists, there are several categories that we have been looking at, and again, community input in these areas will be valued. Areas that are not adequately fenced. So we have been looking at that for all of our different school sites. They're not all the same. We've been looking at our entry and exit points, at our security systems, our cameras, those recording devices. We currently don't have an opportunity for the police department to access our video, so that's an area that we're looking at as well. Lighting. When you think about the lighting in the early mornings and late evenings, does it allow people to hide, to set up, to do things like that? And then finally, our front offices. When you come into the front office of a school, if you're a person who isn't supposed to be there, can you go anywhere on campus, or are there ways to contain and then allow people to enter to the next stage of their access to the campus? So in the area of physical access, those are the main areas that we're looking at right now. One of the other things that we've done this year is we have increased and revised our high school security personnel. So this year we have rehired security. We have 4 security guards that will be full-time 8 hours on our high school campus. They each have a background in security, in working with specifically school security. And they will have or have had trainings in crisis prevention and intervention. And so that's where, how do you intercede in a situation that's building? First aid and stop the bleed training. We also will do additional training with them, with our police department, in working with how do you ensure that students are safe during situations where we have to lock down or evacuate. Another area that we've been focusing on is training and practice, and we haven't gotten as far as we want to go in this area, but when we talk about our staff, we talk about the fact that we need to make sure that there are always precautions, that they're always at a certain level of alertness to issues and problems. Not that we anticipate that there will be, but we also can't behave as if we're in our living room and protected completely from anything that could go wrong. And so in this area, we've talked about doing some training. This one we have not done yet is run, hide, fight training. For those of you who are not familiar with this, I know that, again, the police department has a video on their website, but that is an assessment of a situation where we determine as individuals, for every adult in here, if you're in the mall, if you're in a public place, you're assessing, and should something occur, your first and safest thing to do, if you can, is to run away, to get yourself out of that situation. If you cannot run because the threat is too imminent, then the idea is to hide and not become a target. And then finally, if you're in a situation where it's you and an attacker, is to fight, to be aggressive, to do whatever you can to then stop that from occurring. And so that's a training that we want to look at for our staff, and as age appropriate, we'll talk about that as well for some of our students. And so they have a sense that they're in control, that they in fact can have a strategy to respond. The other area that we've been discussing with our staff, there we go, is the use of non-lethal force. And so what are the kinds of things that staff can do against an attacker coming in or somebody who is not supposed to be on campus, regardless of what that is? And again, we haven't developed that. We're looking for input in that area. The threat assessment, we've talked about that already. And then the other area in conjunction with the hospital is the Stop the Bleed training. How many of you are familiar already with Stop the Bleed? Would you mind a show of hands? Okay, so many of you in the room are familiar, and that is in the event that there were a shooting, but also in the event of accidents, of other kinds of things that you might not anticipate. Do you know how to stop bleeding in order to save a life? And so we are working with the hospital to do that training, and they also offer free community trainings on a regular scheduled basis for anybody who's interested. For our students, as age appropriate, we're looking at moving to the Run, Hide, Fight training. Again, age appropriate Stop the Bleed training. And then we do a lot of drills, and I know we'll hear from some of you perhaps on drills, but the drills create muscle memory. So they allow a student that if there's a drill called, they can respond immediately, do what's safe, so that there's not time wasted in thinking, oh dear, what do I do? Okay. They actually have done some research on this in terms of the muscle memory, and it's really important for students to understand why we do drills and how to practice them appropriately. And once again, what was interesting for me is that students feel safe when they know what to do. It actually increases and enhances that feeling of safety. And then the other area that we're working on, and this is a pretty critical area, is that because there are indicators out there, and they aren't always direct threats, but students know when other students are off, when they're making comments that, you know, that make you suspicious or make you feel like something's not right, that they need to tell somebody about it. That it's not tattling, it's really critical to tell. The Secret Service did a study, it's called the Bystander Study, and what they found is that in the attacks that occurred up until 2006, so we're talking from 1999 through Columbine up until 2006, they studied all of those people, that in almost every case somebody knew the attack was going to happen, that 82% of the people actually got information directly from the attacker, and they were told that something was going to happen. Out of that group, and this is interesting, that 60% of them knew days or weeks in advance of something occurring. 22% were told months or years prior, and only about 18% were just within hours or days of the attack. But again, 82% directly from the attacker. But what was happening is, in most cases, those bystanders did not share the information. And for various reasons. They thought, well, maybe they didn't take it seriously, they thought their friend was just kidding, they just didn't really believe they could do something like that, or they were just afraid to tell somebody because they thought they would get in trouble if they told. So one of the things is creating a culture for all of our students that if you know something, you need to say something. That's the responsible thing to do. And the final area that we've been working on are what are the proactive steps. And so there are some statistics, some pretty good research out there on what are the things that we can do to create a culture that then discourages student violence and student attacks. And I was looking for my cheat sheet. I apologize, I'm going to have to look at the screen. These are fostering a culture of respect, and so creating those positive role models, ensuring that everybody on staff, in the community, in the school, models that positive behavior, creating connections between adults and students so that they feel like if they do learn something, they have somebody they can tell. And then finally, breaking that code of silence and implementing a violence prevention program. So those are some of the proactive things you can do. And as most of you have heard, I hope by now, we are sponsoring a program entitled Rachel's Challenge, and that is a community effort to attack bullying and to identify students who have some need of a connection, and to make sure that as a community we're modeling that process. I was reading, actually just this evening, some information on the President's School Safety Task Force, the transcripts of one of their meetings. They had one of a psychologist and researcher talking about creating that climate. And what they said very clearly is that students have to be involved in creating that climate, but it also has to be modeled in the community. And so as we talk about Rachel's Challenge, the schools are a mirror of our community. And so as we talk about the kinds of things that we are as adults modeling for our students in the community and helping them to make those good choices, this is a very powerful program for doing that. We also want to talk a little bit about and work with our students on the idea that it's very easy to be critical from behind a keyboard, from behind a computer screen. And so there's a lot of cyberbullying, that kind of stuff going on. And again, the adults are as bad as the students. If any of you have been on Facebook and look at some of the things that get put up there when we're not having to say things face to face. And so how do we recognize that those things are harmful, that they do impact you because they're being said about you, and for students who don't have that self-confidence, it has an even more powerful impact on the negative side. The other area that there's some interesting research as well is we talk a lot about there's so much violence in the media, there's violent games and that sort of thing. But by about 5th grade, students can tell the difference between reality and fantasy. They actually understand that that's not real. But what they have discovered that has the greatest influence on them is when they also see that violence in their home or in their neighborhood. So when they see real violence, they have a greater propensity to commit violence. And so again, that important thing of not encouraging and not demonstrating that the way that we solve our problems is through violence, that will have a huge impact in our community. And then finally, that building of trust, that as a community, we're going to take care of each other, we're going to support each other, and we're going to ensure that our students are safe so that they can trust us to be safe. That's something that we have to build as a community. So those are the areas that we've been focusing on, and I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Maston.
Thank you, Superintendent Assire. That is our basic presentation this evening. We are going to open it at this point for questions. We have 2 microphones down front. Feel free to utilize the one closest to you if you have questions, suggestions, something that just comes to mind that you think is helpful. We're happy to hear that. We did, in advance of this, open up an email address to get questions. We did get one response to that. And the statement and the questions, and there's 2 questions in here, are: as a parent of 4 children in Lake Havasu Unified School District, safety of our children is a top priority. My concern is with the lockdown of the high school campus, and I believe what they're referring to here is the gates that we're now locking down at the high school. It is difficult to access the campus for parents during the day, and heaven forbid there is an active shooter at Lake Havasu High School. Wouldn't the campus that's locked make the kids more of a target without a way to escape? And the second question is, additionally, both of my boys that attend Lake Havasu High School are in football. With the heat being such a factor, many of their practices begin at 5 in the morning. How will the lockdown on the campus, not being open until 7:15, affect athletes that have practice so early? Anybody want to take one of those?
That's a very good question. For every action you take, there's the reaction to it. If you want to keep unauthorized people out of the campus, and obviously you're going to have to create some sort of barrier to keep people from just randomly walking onto the campus. So it really is a balance of security. And for instance, there is no way, especially if you take a look at the high school, in particularly with all the outbuildings and the different, if you removed all the fencing from there, you would have to probably have about at least a dozen security officers stationed around there to prevent anybody from walking in at any access point. So obviously there's got to be some way for the school to control that access. I do believe the school has mechanisms in place to get those gates open very quickly if they have to. It's something that I know I was briefed on, and I'm comfortable with the methods that they have in place to get those gates open if they have to in emergency. So it really is a balance of how do we keep people that we don't want on the campus out, and how do we maintain the safety of the students. So as far as the football practice goes, I would probably leave that to somebody that knows something about that.
Well, I'm certainly not the expert on football practice, but the point made about football practice is one that is, I think, important. When students are out in various areas, whether they're on the field practicing, whether they're at lunch, if something happens, there's procedures in place. And so what the important piece is that we're actually following up and training those students that should there be something that occurs, do they know what to do and where to go? As the chief said, our coaches are there, they have access to the locker rooms, but students are exposed anytime they're out in an open area. So we do have, and we do practice those drills during certain times, but I know that that particular question was shared with Mr. Becker, who has followed up on making sure that we have a plan in place as well for them.
So there you go. There's a good question. It actually made us think. We like to think. Anybody else want to make us think? You certainly can email, or you could, even if you had Facebook on your phone, I've asked for questions online. So.
Yeah. All right. As we have seen throughout the progression of these school shooters seem to be getting smarter and smarter, such as pulling a fire alarm middle of the day. It's not designed as a drill. Kids rush out in the hallway, they open up fire. And is there any way to implement, and just more towards probably Mr. Madison, because he's in that kind of field, with having some sort of camera switch mounted right above the fire alarm poles? So if somebody pulls that, they see if it's a child versus a staff member. And also incorporating a blue one there for the police, where I heard some school districts are doing that.
I'll take a little bit of it and then I'll pass it down to Dan. Can you put cameras out there? Yes. And there may be a value in knowing who pulled the fire alarm and whether it was for a nefarious reason or not. You still have to have a person to review that and to know who actually did it. So if we are pulling a fire alarm, it's a life safety issue. At times, it may not just be a drill. It may be, okay, a drill wasn't scheduled. We got to get people out. I think a bigger value would be to have pan, tilt, and zoom cameras that we could access when the fire alarm goes off to see what's going on around the school. And that's something that we can actually, if done right, tie straight into dispatch at the police department. I think that's where the bigger bang for the buck is going to be. If we lived in a world of unlimited funds, sure, we could do all sorts of things. I've seen, and I know you've seen too, Mike, online where they have disorientation systems that they put in, smoke, noise, cameras, the whole enchilada, and they're not inexpensive to do. They're some money. Not that it's ultimately a financial issue, but if you're going to spend the dollars, what is the biggest and highest performance piece in there?
Okay, I think my portion of the question was the blue alarm. A lot of you may have noticed we actually have those at ASU campus. You'll see them throughout, that any student there can hit an alarm and it sends an alarm straight. Obviously that's a decision for the school district to make, and one of the key things, and I probably should have said this in my start, is I don't tell the schools what to do. I don't tell the school districts what to do. I'm here to assist the school district in whatever way I can, whatever direction the school district wants to go on these things, then we're here to assist, collaborate with it. I think, obviously things like that we are very open to. I am a real advocate of cameras. The original cameras that were in, I think I had worked with the school district many years ago for a SAFE grant that we actually, a school safety grant that we actually got those original cameras. So it's a real benefit to us to be able to tap into cameras and see what's happening immediately when we're responding. We can allow the responding officers to know exactly what's happening, because we have people that are actually sitting in a room and they have monitors across thing, and they can be guiding the officers and telling them what happened. So I am an advocate of video. Obviously, if that's in, all we need is IP address. We can tap into those. But yeah, no, I think all these are ideas and things that are open for discussion. And if that was a direction that the school district wanted to go in, then we absolutely would assist in any way we can. And great idea.
And I'll obviously finish up, since it started with the smoke alarm, or the fire alarm is the kind of the focal point. The reality is we can put a laser pointer on a lot of problems and address those, but I think to refer to what Dan said earlier, is there's also the opposite reaction. And so has that conversation come up? It has come up a lot. Is it happening locally? Is it happening at the state level? Is it happening at the national level? Absolutely. And I think, like all of the other topics, it's some good conversation. Where do we find that happy medium? I would just say, kind of caution everybody that as you take in information of events that occur around the nation, maybe don't necessarily put 100% faith in the social media and some of those details. The reality is we do find after the fact, when we all study these situations, sometimes that initial information was a little bit shady. And so Are we looking at that? Absolutely, but I wish I had easy answers to all of these things. I would hand it over to the school and we could solve all of it. It's just unfortunately why we're all here tonight.
Okay. Just before you, I've got one more here that came in. Thanking us for organizing the meeting, and the suggestion is mental health first aid training for staff and other personnel. And that came in from Chaz Martinez. So we will be looking at that and seeing what we can do in that arena, making an evaluation on that. So.
My name is Judy Day. I've been a substitute in this district for 30 plus years, and I'm very glad to hear that you're doing all this training. Where are we substitutes who are in the schools every day included? Why are we not included, I guess is the question. I haven't heard about any of the training that you're talking about. It has not come out that we are invited or being a part of it. And I can tell you that it is kind of scary to be, you're talking about the person with the keys for the gates. How do I know who has a key to the gate? When I come in to sub here at the high school, I don't even get a key to the women's bathroom. So, you know, that's kind of scary. If I don't have a way to contact somebody, I'm assuming around me somebody is going to have a key. But I think we need to be on top of things as much as the staff at all of the schools, not just one or two of them.
Thank you, Judy.
Hi there, my name's Devin Brookover. I teach at Telesis, and I was actually wondering if you were aware of any current grants for school safety equipment and things. You know, of course, as you mentioned, you don't want budgeting to get in the way of the safety at the school, but I'm just, I guess, wondering if there's anything available that any of you know of, having been looking into putting some of these things in place.
Actually, there are some grants that are out there, and I think at the federal level, we're starting to see some things come forward. There's been some discussion at the state level. We're not seeing them roll out that frequently. You're probably not seeing them through your emails either. But we do know that there are some coming down. What we are finding out, though, is much of the training is free. And that's been amazing. So, for example, the active shooter training, the threat assessment training, that has been done all over the state. And have had opportunities to attend that, send all of our team to that at the administrative level. And again, the Stop the Bleed training, those are free trainings. The active shooter training is actually free training. There are different organizations that do that. And so what we're finding out is that there actually is a lot of free things. However, where we start looking at the funding for safety are things like the camera security systems and so forth. That's where it gets expensive, where we're looking at doing perhaps some modifications to buildings and so forth. And that is a dilemma.
Mr. Sanders.
I'm the principal at Havasu Elementary. My name's Claude Sanders. My question is for Chief Doyle. We've known each other a long time, and at least I got his chief right instead of calling him general today. I would like to know if there's any thought of possibly expanding the resource officer program, because our two resource officers are wonderful. What happens, though, is they get so caught up because we know one is at Thunderbolt and one is at the high school. We have 6 other elementaries. You have Telesis, you have HPA, we have Calvary, all of this other part. And what we've seen is, you know, it's not just a high school and junior high issue. We've had a lot of issues with them attacking elementary schools because they can do absolutely mass damage there, and even in comparison with the high schools. Years ago, I know we had more in it, but there were some other financial things. And down the road, as they get talking about this at the
state level to federal level and that. Is that something that you guys might be thinking about, maybe talking about sooner or later?
Great question. I'm a big advocate of the school resource program. I have been for many years. Even when the recession took place and you saw police departments pulling back on their resource officers all around the country, I refused to do that because I think that it pays dividends down the road. And I'm a real advocate of our youth and especially our schools. But the question as far as, it's whether I want to put more school resource officers or I can put more school resource officers. I already dedicate 2. I have about 6 others that teach our programs in the elementary schools, as well as we cover telesis and HPA. And really what it comes down to is budget. Back in the day, we had 96 police officers. We currently have 83. In the recession, we scaled it back to 83. We've got 4 frozen positions because of budgetary issues. So we're down in the 70s, and I just don't have the budget, and I don't have the personnel to be able to, because I would have to pull them off the street. So that's more officers that come off the street, and I'm not at all saying that our kids are not worth it, because they absolutely are. But we also have to answer calls for service, and we need to be out on the street for accidents, for people calling us through. And so really, that's great, and I'm all for it if we're in a position. But the city's been facing a lot of real budgetary concerns. Anybody that's been kind of staying up on where we're at as a city with budget. So we do kind of compensate for that by utilizing the patrol officers to teach part-time in the schools and to get them in there to the schools and with the programs. I know you'd like to see more, and I think someday hopefully we'll be able to do that.
The other thing, and this is not exactly addressing this, but I think for the community to be aware of, the other thing that the police department does is they encourage the officers when they're writing a report, maybe to go park in the school parking lot and finish writing their report, or to be around the schools during certain times of the day so that they're very visible. And that has another powerful impact on our community in saying, yeah, at the times like before and after school, when kids are out, our officers are out on patrol and they're paying attention to the areas around our schools. So thank you for doing that.
We had an online question that asks, what about school bus safety? Did we want to call Mr. Cairns up here?
Well, I see Mr. Kearns thinking really hard over there. I would say that Mr. Kearns, in working with him, does a tremendous job in helping his staff, whether they're monitors, bus monitors, or drivers, to constantly be trained and receive the most up-to-date training that's available to the district. They perform drills just like they do at the building level. They perform bus drills, evacuation drills, and they also work closely at times with the police department. We've had incidents in the past where police involvement was necessary, and because of the training of these drivers and monitors, from what we were able to gather based on the results of the investigations, that the drivers actually did their job very well in the most challenging of circumstances of trying to get such a large vehicle to a safe place. But training is, I think, the theme of the night, and that's something that will continue as we receive further information of the best practices to deal with threats. We will train accordingly. I hope that answers that question.
I would also add that in addition to the training, we do have cameras on the bus, so we're able to monitor the things that are occurring on our buses. And our drivers have some routines in place that also ensure safety. And so the students have assigned seating. They know which bus stops they're supposed to get on, supposed to get off, who's supposed to be riding the buses. They actually know the kids' names. And one of the things that we know is that our students on the buses, the ride to and from school needs to be safe, but it also needs to be emotionally safe. And so our drivers actually have pretty good connections with the students, and they are all invited to be a part of our Rachel's Challenge training. They are provided other training on the personal side of being a bus driver, as well as on the professional and safety side.
I'd like to add too, I've had an occasion or two to review some of the tape from the buses, and I can tell you we had a medical issue last year, and it was just amazing. I think the bus driver had worked for us for 2 weeks and had the bus stopped within a minute of the medical issue in behind her, and really took care of that kid until EMS showed up. And EMS was in there inside of 6 minutes from the start of the incident. It was just phenomenal to watch that we had an employee that was that new on the bus that could do that much to impact the safety of that child at that point in time. So I think we're doing a wonderful job in that from the evidence I've seen.
If I can just add to that, not only in that incident did the bus driver handle things in a pretty textbook fashion, but because of training, there was also a student involved in relaying communication, and that was all as part of the training. So the student also stepped up and was able to assist in that emergency situation, and handled himself very well composed, because the bus driver was directing him, and that student knew what to do, thanks to the instructions from the driver, as well as the training and drills.
We're ready for another one if anybody's got one. Anyone at all? Oh, there we go.
Is the district willing to explore the option of having school counselors at the elementary level to be proactive about some of the issues that we're seeing at the middle school and high school level, so that we can help those younger children and identify those children who have some of the mental health issues early on, rather than being reactionary at the middle school and high school level?
Superintendent Assire?
We actually have had that conversation, and we're hopeful right now that as our state funding becomes more stable and increases, that we may be able to add those kinds of positions at the elementary. We don't have any plans to do that for the immediate future. However, one of the things that has been very critical for elementary schools is the partnerships that we have with the community. And we did have our student assistance program through interagency that's now being picked up by the Community Health Foundation. And so we are anticipating still having that support at the elementary school and expanding that again this year.
Anyone else? We really do want the input and the feedback. Oh, here comes Mike. It's Mike again.
And I've done my fair research on this topic, as John well knows. We all know that there's a 0% shooter activity inside of an actual classroom. It takes place in the hallways, and with the locked door as a deterrent. But some doors still have windows, or as we all know, a lock can be shot. If that person wants in that room bad enough, but there are devices out there. It's a secondary lock. It goes up over underneath. It can only be removed from the inside of the classroom. And I know we're talking about all the training, but I'm looking at my wife as an educator here, protecting her even more, because she would give her life at first. So how can we, even if we have to go to the city and put it on a special vote or something to fund, just to buy these secondary door locks? I think I forgot what they're called. I can look them up. I have it at home on my computer. And I've done research on them. It was by ex-military combat special forces who designed, and there's like 3 or 4 different ways to lock these doors to stop this specific situation from happening, of a shooter going inside of a classroom where the kids are hiding. So just another idea of safety for the staff and the kids.
Thank you. Any comments up here on that?
You know, I think every suggestion, every idea is, that's why I think all of us up here are taking notes. That's a great suggestion. I think what you're referring to, there's some devices that slide over the the hydraulics or whatever of the actual closing door, the mechanism. There's some that go under the door frame, some that go around the door handles. I think that's something that is definitely worth looking into. I couldn't disagree with you at all. I think that that's a great suggestion, and that's something that I have right here in front of me.
And you can train and train and train, and then when it still hits, it's a different feeling, you know, so it's just a little more protection.
And I can tell you that as in meeting with my maintenance staff, just as recent as today, we are proactive in looking at all of our campuses and trying to identify areas which can be improved just about immediately, and then some that are a little bit more long-term as far as having to plan for that. But we are trying to create a system of kind of uniformity throughout the district so that we don't have 15 different types of locking mechanisms. That's going to take some time because every building was built at a different year. Some buildings were upgraded more recently than others. So there's an awareness within the district, and there's a plan in trying to deal with tending to all of those needs. And we are, just as recently as today, we met with an architect even as part of this team, looking at blueprints and trying to identify areas in which we can bring some solutions to and resolutions to some of these things, answers and some of these concerns that we do have within the district. So your concerns are definitely our concerns as well.
Okay.
This is for the chiefs. Is there currently any coordinated training going on between the two departments? And if so, are you guys running live fire drills, or have you run live fire drills in the past?
Yeah, we do coordinate our efforts, and when you talk about live fire, we actually utilize simunitions. So when we do our scenario-based training, we are using simunitions to add a little more realism to it.
Both departments, the fire department, the police department, have coordinated together, held training together on, what to do in a school shooting scenario, and then done drills together to coordinate your efforts to make sure everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, the drills are coming next. We've coordinated on tabletops and other efforts, but more in-depth drills, we are working on that. Within the next year, yeah.
Okay, someone was headed to the mic over here, or Mrs. Cox.
My question is, are we at a place, or will we be at a place soon where we will talk or start discussing if teachers are interested in concealed carry or want to have that conversation, they want to volunteer, they want to talk about it, are we at a place where you're going to discuss it? I'm not talking about mandatory, anything like that, but if we have people that are retirees, veterans, you know, or have carried, you know, have concealed carry permits, have had them for 30 years, have training, whatever, you know, are we at a place where that's going to be discussed at any time in the future? Thank you.
I guess I'll take that one. We have started to explore the laws and insurance nuances behind that. It's been a discussion in the background. Again, this is a policy issue at the board level, backed by insurance company and by state law. It is our understanding that state law would allow for us to bring people in. We're working with the insurance company on what that would look like for them. But again, we as a district governing board would put a policy in place to allow that to happen. It's entirely up to the administrative team down, I believe, to the building administrator as to whether anything like that would ever get rolled out. But it's just one more tool in the toolkit that we could potentially use. And it's only in the discussion phase right now. It's not an active item. So.
Kathleen Killian, I'm president of the Starline PTA. Just so that you know, on that particular issue, at the PTA state convention, the convention adopted a resolution that the PTA would not support legislation that would support having arming teachers in particular. Just so that you know, put that in your conversation.
It's our understanding right now, and this is still at the conversation with legal, that it is legal in Arizona if we so chose to do some type of an added resource officer type of a augmentation. This is an opinion that comes down from the state attorney general that says that it is actually legal to conceal carry on a campus. It's really comes down to insurance policy, is my understanding, and also district internal policy at this point as to whether or not we would allow for it.
Okay, yeah, I'm not going to argue that point at all.
No.
I'm just going to let you know that the state PTA doesn't want to arm teachers. If we want to have other concealed carry people, they don't have
Right.
any say on that.
Right.
My question from me personally is, what are we doing to build the trust between the students and the administration? We've talked a lot about all of these problems and locks on the doors and all of these things, but the problem stems from the heart, and it stems from pain that these students or shooters are experiencing, and it's coming out in gunfire. What are we doing as a community to help with the very cause of the whole problem?
I'm going to send it back to Superintendent Assire.
Send it this way.
Sure.
We're actually part of what we're doing with Rachel's challenge is to directly address that. So it really is about the hearts and minds, and not just our kids, but the adults in the community. So I know that's why we're bringing it in, kindergarten through 12th, and then again for the community, all on the same day, to try to generate that sense of community between the kids and the adults. I'm not sure if you're speaking about student to a particular teachers. I'm not sure what you mean by the disconnect between the administration and the students. Sorry.
No, that's fine. To clarify, I'm not suggesting that there's a disconnect between our students and our teachers and our administration. There's pain on the personal level that is coming out this way. I think the event you're talking about is fantastic. Have you tapped the fine arts community to participate in that program?
No, but I will be tomorrow. Thank you.
Yeah, call me.
Okay. We'll definitely do that. I think the disconnect is, I think we all see it everywhere. I think we all see a disconnect. It's not just our kids, it's our adults too. People are just disengaged, and it's a tough thing to try to change. You know, you see it in your churches, you see it in with your friends, your family, or politics. You can't turn on the TV. Everything is just so god awful that we're seeing, and our kids are seeing it too, and they're acting accordingly. I feel like we're sending mixed messages to our kids. You know, we treat them like children, but we expect them to act like adults. And I don't mean that at the lower grades, obviously. I'm talking at the high school level. And I don't mean anybody in particular. I mean, this is what the system forces, you know, out of us. Everything's very regimented. And, you know, we got ninth grade kids that, you know, are very entrepreneurial and could be running a business right now, but instead they're you know, sitting in a classroom and they're bored stiff. So I think there's a lot of different ways that we can recognize the disconnection that's taking place. And I don't think that the social media is helping at all. I think it's really bad. And there's a lot of studies out there. We've often talked in the boardroom at our work sessions about this Dr. Jean Twenge, who is a psychology professor at San Diego State University, and she has released a book. I didn't bring that one with me. I'm reading a new one, Teen 2.0. But she talks about the disconnect with the kids. They're living in this phone. They are so isolated. They are so lonely. Talk about trying to keep up with the Joneses, the fear of missing out on everything. This cycle never shuts down, and I don't see anybody willing to address that issue. You know, that has to be addressed at home. It has to be addressed just in our culture, period. And I think that's a great place to start. And when we talk about these school shootings that take place, there's a real lack of situational awareness. These kids just don't have anymore. I mean, you've got kids hurting themselves, not that I've heard locally, but I mean, I've watched this videos that these kids are running into phone poles or, you know, breaking their ankles because they're just not even paying attention to what's going on right in front of them, let alone, you know, around them. So I think those are the conversations that we should be having, and I really appreciate everybody that showed up here today, but it makes me really sad that this is all that there is today on a subject that I know every parent has to be concerned about. Certainly I know the students are, because I've had a few of them that I've met with, and I've been told by, you know, what appear to be adult children in every other way that they're scared, you know. So I don't know if anybody else has any feedback on that, but
I do have a couple comments I want to make. Mrs. Cohen, as you said, our society is very challenged, and we look at that as a global issue. Some of the things we do here as a local area is look at our response to intervention and putting in some school-wide systems like our positive behavior intervention support, PBIS, where we try to focus on that positive. And again, it goes back to those relationships and identifying those students who may be demonstrating some of those behavioral challenges or those disconnects. So there's opportunities to really focus on opportunities to make those connections. And again, students getting positive reinforcement for what they're needing to do. And we also teach those social skills and things like they need that they may not have because of their challenges they may have in their homes or just reality of challenges that students have. We do work on the early intervention academic and the behavioral pieces again because it does start early. We do see youth, you know, when you start to go back and look at patterns in history. So we do try to make sure we give them the opportunities to engage in those programs. And then we do work with community partners like Mojave Mental Health, Southwest Behavioral. We're very closely working with interagency, and now we're going into the program with the SAP, which is our Student Assistance Program at the elementary, which is the opportunity for students who can be referred by their staff, their parents, that may be having some challenges and working through. And again, it's making connections and helping them to develop those positive pro-social skills to be successful.
I'd like to add to that, Mrs. Walters. Some years ago at the high school, we put into place, I wouldn't call it a program, but at the end of the first quarter, we asked teachers and other staff members to now they've had time to know their kids and to recommend the names of students who are not connected. They're not connected to the school. When they don't seem to have a friend, perhaps they don't have anyone at all, or they come into the classroom and they don't make eye contact with the teacher. They're not interested. It's just as a student, I would say, who's just not connected. And then at that, I'm not going to describe the way that runs today. I'm sure there have been changes that have been made, but the effort was made to let all adults who had that, the student who had the recommendation by any adult, to let all of the teachers and any other adults who worked with that student know that this was a disconnected student. And what happened then is that the teacher would be standing out in the hallway and not really knowing that this child was on that list, but make an effort. Hey, Johnny, how are you? And, you know, Johnny's like, well, nobody's ever taken any interest in me before. What's going on? And the teachers would try to reach out and make a connection, and the counselors knew, the administration knew, and we would all try, would go that extra effort, and I felt that it really paid off. We also put into place nighttime, which was, I don't know how often that meets now, but it was a special time, KNIGHT, you know, nighttime, and at that time, teacher would have a group of students, and if she got those kids as a freshman, she kept that same group of students all the way through to the senior year and got to know those kids. That teacher could become a shelter, a contact, and then the counselors had a program, and they still do, of topics that they would get together with the kids, not always mental health issues, you know, getting ready for graduation, all kinds of things, but it was a social, emotional kind of occasion to build upon that and make those contacts with the kids. So I felt that it was I felt that that program paid off, and we do think about those kinds of things. We're always looking for ways to do that, and I know some of the other schools do that. I just happen to know about the one at the high school, but that's what ours looked like.
Couple from online. One is an observation. It says all gates are open in the morning for students to enter. I assume that they're talking about the high school. There is no way to check every person coming in. I don't see any way to change that. Thank you. And then a question. Are teachers being trained to recognize mental health issues in students? Are there any school psychologists on staff full-time at the middle school and high school?
There has been training, and we have extended that through our professional development, dealing with the first aid and the mental health training has been offered to all staff in the past, and that's something we'll continue to look at partnering with the agencies that have provided that and extending that. I know our counselors right now are working at the high school very closely to look at things that can be done. With the last couple of years, we've had some suicide incidents, and we've been looking and working with expansion on that, again looking at that training. So there has been some training at that site level, but again making sure it's being offered. School psychologists are very difficult to find, to hire and contract when we look at related services, so it is a challenge. We do have 3 very qualified school psychologists in our district that are available. All the schools do have one that is assigned to the site, but they are not at that site only. But again, as part of our threat assessment teams, they are available, and they will triage and prioritize to be there in the event that they need to address that. And they do follow up and work very closely with administration when they have concerns communicated. And then again, we also use other resources and community partners to provide support through counseling and other services that are available.
Okay.
Let me answer the question about security. Prior to this year, our security guards worked, or the high school security guards worked split shifts. 2 of them worked in the morning. They overlapped during the day, and then we had 4 total, and 2 worked in the afternoon. And so this year, the security guards at the high school switched to full time, and so there'll be 4 before school and 4 after school. And one of the things that the security guards talked about was being out there and being present in the morning. And so At the current gate configuration, you're correct, there's not a security guard that can be at every single gate and manning the parking lots and manning all of the things, but there's going to be a more visible presence of security guards before school and after school, which were big issues prior to this year.
Thank you, Jamie. Any other input from the audience? We've got another one.
Hi, I work here at the high school, and kind of the basis of a lot of these shootings and violence are kids that have been victims of bullying. And my granddaughter last year was a victim at the junior high level, and they could never get to the bottom of it. And they said it was the worst they'd seen. I've heard of Rachel's Challenge, I don't know a lot about it, but what are we going to do to really get to the bottom of the kids that are really affecting other kids and their psychological, mind games that they play with these bullying and things that they do?
So I don't know if we've shared what Rachel's Challenge or who Rachel was. I don't think we talked about that tonight, but Rachel was the first person that was a victim at the Columbine shooting, and she had a personal outreach program that she had been deploying since I believe she was 12 years old or so. And so unbeknownst to her parents and her family, the family attended all the funerals, and then during their daughter's funeral, they were stunned at how many students came up and talked about how Rachel changed their life. And because she reached out to all those kids, she stood up when somebody was being bullied. She reached out to the new kids. She made sure everybody that she could find knew that they had at least one friend. So I think that'll be the power of bringing that type of program here. Kids, learn what they live and they model what they see, and I see it all the time. I see the bullying taking place in adults, and sometimes bullying is just, being silent, not engaging somebody who's wanting to engage, in a topic, whether it's education or politics or whatever. You always see that person hanging out on the sideline. So I think if our kids aren't seeing the adults model the behavior, then they're going to struggle with it too, and that starts young. And then as far as earlier I just want to touch on, we had talked about the disconnection. I'm not talking about kids that are, have deep emotional issues or have past experiences with their family or anything traumatic in their past. I'm talking about in general, I'm seeing a disconnection. For instance, and she'll probably kill me, my daughter, or my best friend's daughter just graduated from high school. Great kid. She's a super kid. She did everything right, by the book. She's disconnected. And she looks perfect. She does everything. She works 2 jobs, but she's disconnected, and she's in that phone, and she's seeing images that her brain is not mature enough to comprehend because they're outrageous. We've all seen things on the internet, and our kids are now growing up with this. It's on steroids, hyperspeed, and everybody's trying to outdo each other. So I don't know if I answered your question, and I didn't want to turn this into a Rachel's Challenge, promotion, but I do hope that everybody will fully embrace this program so that it can give our kids a chance to feel content, to feel safe, to feel, wanted, accepted.
And if I can address a little bit the other part of the question is how do we get to the bottom of some of the really intense bullying that's going on? And frankly, it's almost impossible to do that. When you read the transcript, Dr. Hinduha, which is a professor of school criminology in Florida, he's also the co-director of the Cyberbullying Research Center, so they've done a lot of research on that. And basically what they're saying, and that is among teens, about 35% of them have been bullied, and that for the most part, those students who are being bullied are also being cyberbullied, are also being bullied at school, but they're so subversive that it's really difficult to trace it down. And the other issue that they have is that another 12% of kids admit that they are doing that bullying and don't have any remorse for doing so. And so when you try to investigate those situations, they're difficult to prove again because you can't get to the bottom of them. It's the social media aspect of it has made it much more difficult, and I think everybody is aware of that. But the issues that it creates in students, and particularly in students who have what we call low resilience, those are the students who do tend to act out, who do tend to who consider suicide, who consider doing things to harm themselves that may not be life-threatening. But it's a systemic problem and it's a societal problem. And so the answer to that is as a community we have to do that. I don't want to sound hopeless about that because I actually think we're in a unique situation as a community to do that. But we have to understand the horrible negative influences of that kind of bullying before we can respond to it. The other thing that the research has shown around bullying, and particularly around cyberbullying, which is again fascinating, but what they talk about is that it has to be an effort by the students to handle it. And so as adults, we can say over and over again, you shouldn't do that, and you're hurting this person, but students themselves need to come out and say, this is not okay, this is not how we do things. And they need to set their own social norming as a group that this is not what we do here in Lake Havasu City. And that is, I think, one of the things that's very powerful about Rachel's Challenge is it's not a program that the adults implement. And we talk about the assembly and the sharing of the story, but the bigger part of that is now how do we do what Rachel was able to do on a grand scale? And so how do we create among ourselves those opportunities to be kind, to intercede when we see bullying occur, to share the norm that it's not okay in our city? How do we create that energy? And they call that the chain reaction, which is what we're hoping to create in this case. Because truly, unless we get our community and our students bought into it, we're not going to fix that problem.
That would follow along Rachel's Challenge, you see something, say something.
See something and say it, absolutely. And that's, for teenagers, often that's difficult. I'm not sure, it's, from my age, it's hard to understand why, because it's been a long time ago. But not everybody has the security and the confidence to say, you know what, that's not okay, you need to stop that. Or we're going to go tell somebody because I know this happened and I can be your witness. A lot of that doesn't occur anymore. So we're going to make it happen.
One aspect of bullying, first of all, I want to, is why kids don't report it. They think the bully will find out, but it's extremely important, and then the situation will get worse. So it's extremely important for kids and students to contact the principal, contact your principal and say, this is happening. And the principal has ways where the bully, once they find out who it is and can verify it, will never find out that who reported it. But you just absolutely have to ask the school for help, and then they can try to figure out who the bully is and get proof of it. But the other aspect of bullying is that it's the kids who appear afraid or frightened, who appear not to know how to handle a situation like that, and the bullies go after those kids because they're targets. And so all of us as teachers, parents, administrators, and counseling and talking to the kid who's bullied, we have to say, okay, we're going to work on this. We're going to work on you. Let's have a plan the next time somebody bullies you and you give them tips, just pretend you're an actor. Be an actress. And if that kid realizes he thinks that you don't care, of course you do, and you're scared to death inside, but if he thinks that you don't care and it doesn't bother you, we can practice some kind of flip things that you can say back to him once you feel like you can. once that student develops that strength inside, that kid's not going to get bullied anymore. And that's something that we have to do on the other end of helping that student to become strong and set up boundaries so the other kids know they have boundaries and they'll leave those kids alone. I mean, Mr. Rooney just told me that none of his kids ever got bullied, and I bet I know why. You know, the other kids did not see them as victims, and it's just something that we need to do is to help those kids get past that as far as being victims.
Someone mentioned earlier the issue of trust, and it's the it's the parents, the kid, and the school administrators or the teachers that plays such a big role, that communication. And that trust is that once a problem, so often people won't get a hold of an administrator or a teacher, and so the problem continues. But what I found out was that if kids have confidence in you, that they trust you and that they can go to you and they can be assured that you're going to address the problem, unbeknownst to the other, the bully, you can address those things and that will stop. Another thing that I would say is that kids that get engaged in the schools, by that I mean they get into the clubs, they get into organizations, they get into athletics. And so what happens is you have a larger group that, they have a common interest. And that sort of alleviates that type of a problem too. But I think that issue of the trust is real important, because anyone who goes and tells someone and then they call in the aggressor and they say, well, so-and-so told me, I'm sorry to say that happens, and that kills that trust right there, So I just think that's so important, and I understand what you're saying, and so when I leaned over and told Kathy, my kids were a little more aggressive and all that, so they would have reacted a little bit differently, but that was my kids. And so, but I do understand that because I dealt with kids where that came up. But and there's no reason for a kid to go to school and be afraid to go to school. Then the focus has to be on the kids that are making them uneasy, and that becomes the responsibility of the teachers and the administrators to address that.
I'd like to follow up on that also. You have your child, if you call the school yourself, or you have your child say, okay, tomorrow, tell your teacher you need to go to the nurse, that you feel sick. You go to the nurse. You don't say, I want to go to the principal's office. You don't say that in front of all the other kids. I'm not feeling good. So the teacher writes a note, and the student goes to the principal's office, the nurse's office, and the nurse knows, tell your child, I need to go see the principal. And the nurse knows what this is about. And the nurse surreptitiously gets the child to the principal's office and tells the principal who it is, where it's happening, what building it's in, so forth, all that. And then what happens is the principal lets the teacher know that tomorrow at 10 o'clock in your hallway, right outside your classroom, this is happening. A security guard is sent over at that time, and it's the security guard or the teacher who catches the bully doing that kind of thing. And that it never comes back that it's your child. And that's where the snag is there's no reporting. The kids hate to report it, and they won't let their parents report it. Don't buy into that. Get it reported. The school will do something about it.
Mary Jo Mulligan, I'm the principal at Thunderbolt, and this is kind of back to Rachel's challenge. The thing that we're very excited about that's different about Rachel's challenge is it's shifting from stop bullying to be kind. And it's really shifting kid by kid, parent to student, all of that, it's telling kids to stop bullying worked, we wouldn't have bullying. We know that. We've been saying that forever. But to really shift it over to a very specific be kind, and to have the opportunity to have these lessons and clubs on our campus specifically about being kind, that's going to make a difference. So I think that's very different and very unique from the messages that we've always tried to get across, and we're excited to have it come to our school. So grateful that the community supported it.
I'm going to jump in right here. I've got 3 that have piled up online, and one is germane to what we're talking about. It's a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt, and it says, "Nobody can make you feel inferior without your consent." That's why we have to work on self-esteem, and we have to build the children up. And then I've got 2 here, one that I think kind of answers the other. It says, "Kingman High School has a security guard posted at the entrance during school hours. Why can't we have one?" At the midpoint of last year, we had one at the entrance, and then the next question is the whole of the high school to be gated off to bottleneck foot traffic and access in and out of the school for security? The answer is yes, and that's where we put the security guard. So, did I answer those correctly? I think I did. Okay.
I'm Andrea Hellard. I'm the principal at Jamaica Elementary, and I just wanted to, there's a request that I have, but also just to point out that I'm really thankful that we're having this conversation, that we've expanded it the way that we have. I think that as schools across the district, we've made a lot of strides in the last year or two to try to make sure that we're expanding the conversations that we're having with our school sites with regard to emergency procedures. We're expanding our drills. We're having our school safety officers on our campuses to have those drill down conversations about what it looks like. Our drills are happening at inopportune times, which is exactly when they're supposed to happen, because nothing ever happens the way you plan it. But most importantly, I think expanding the community conversation is the most important thing. And I think that the one thing I was thinking about as we were having this conversation was I'm super thankful, because I'm also on the committee for suicide prevention, which is where we've researched the Rachel's Challenge, and I'm thankful to the Parks and Recreation Department for being a partner in that amongst many of the other community members. And as I was sitting there looking at Janice, I thought, okay, so as we're having this conversation about tabletop scenarios and additional trainings that involve the district or the community, I thought, what am I doing to train my staff that's coming to my campus after school? And so there is my request. My request is, as we continue these discussions for additional trainings, let's make sure that we're including these conversations with the people that are on our campus that maybe I'm not responsible directly for training, because I feel responsible for training. I think that we all need to make sure that we're involved in not just the Rachel's Challenge together, and because my kids are also her kids. That makes sense? So that's just where I wanted that conversation to go. But I'm excited about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have another point?
I'm also very grateful that we're having this conversation, and I am grateful to know all of the planning and all the discussions that are happening. A couple of things I'd like to point out just to add to the conversation is what we focus on magnifies, and this is back just to the individual level, the individual child and adult. What we focus on magnifies. So if we focus on the good in our lives, the good in our lives looks even better. When we focus on the problems, they get a lot bigger. That's not to minimize the problems that are occurring, but it's just a perspective can mean the difference, all the difference in the world. Also, keeping in mind that this is not hopeless. To dispel darkness, turn on a light. We are all doing that, and I am so grateful for everyone here that's participating in doing that. I have a suggestion. My suggestion is to start with gratitude. If every teacher, every student, every administrator begins the day naming 3, 5 things that they're grateful for, it changes the course of the day. It changes the course of where your mind goes. I started this at a time when it was very difficult to name anything that I was grateful for. But once I named 5, I could name 10. By the time I named 10, 20 came to mind immediately in my darkest hours. But I can tell you, as I continue to practice that, it is like having Captain America's shield and Wonder Woman's bracelets on all at the same time. And anything that anybody says to me deflects. It makes all the difference in the world. May I suggest that we practice gratitude daily?
Thank you.
Again, part of our PBIS is in capturing kids' marks. We do it's what we call it good things, and as a staff, we share whether every classroom is so different. We might start a day with that, or we have an afternoon time. But the teacher shares good things, and students get to voluntarily share good things. And it's a great thing that we are trained on and we do have on our site, and it allows us to get to know our students, and you hear anything, and we celebrate all of that, whether it's rant, like I got the crust off my peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Like, we treat all the good things as great things, so we do preach that gratitude, just so that as a parent you're aware of something.
We have a consensus up here among the chiefs about peanut butter and jelly, by the way.
I love the attitude of gratitude. Thank you for doing this. My name's Eric Sieber. My wife's a new teacher in the district. And I appreciate that you've all taken all this time to do this. And I wanted to also say that I'm thrilled. I researched when I saw Rachel's challenge. We heard Daryl Scott speak many years ago. Very impressive. I love what they're doing. So thank you for that. My main comment was directed to you, Chief, with respect to the resource officers. Do you have, I don't know, I'm fairly new here, do you have reserves? Do you have, or could you pull reserves? We got a lot of retired law enforcement in this town to be able to provide additional resource officers at the schools that's not costing the money.
We absolutely are always willing to take people that would volunteer and be reserves. In Arizona, one of the issues we run across is in order to be a reserve with us, a reserve police officer, you have to get state certified, and there's not a separate reserve process. So you, if you're retired and you hold Arizona state certification or certification from another state, you can obviously get certified. The problem is sometimes running across retired officers that want to jump back in and put a uniform back on after they've retired. But we are really big on our volunteers throughout the entire city. We take volunteers, and obviously I throw out there any retired police officers that want to get involved and volunteer to come in and assist us, or are interested in getting certified and becoming a volunteer, contact us, and we're always open to new ideas, or anybody that wants to volunteer.
Ms. Nowakowski's been patiently waiting over there. She is. It's been kind of a crawl.
All right, as the 6th grade teacher at the school that needs the fencing, I've been there 8 years, and I think majority of you here have been in my classroom, so you know what I'm speaking of. I came from Thunderbolt, and I will tell you honestly, and it saddens me that it was so prevalent, that I was at Thunderbolt for 16 years, and I was upstairs, far away from the front door. But for where I'm at right now, it is a question for our school that we're just wondering. I know there's a conversation, it was being had. Where's the next step? Is it still going on about a fence out front?
I personally looked at the plans today.
Okay.
So they are in blueprint form. The next step will be to attach a dollar figure to that, and then we will but I personally looked at plans for your school and another school today.
It saddens me because it's that connection place. Right outside my door, it's where we connect. It's where all the kids gather before school, after school, and so it is where I have my parent-teacher conferences every morning and every night. So it saddens me that we are having to go this route, but hopefully we can strategically make that still possible.
As part of that plan, we're trying to be true to what you saw in the PowerPoint today and to create the most welcoming environment as possible. Great. While keeping your area in particular, because I know where you are, but every area secure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Cox?
I had just one thing to share as far as on the mental health side. My business is in virtual medicine, telemedicine, and nutritional counseling, and we live in a state in Arizona and California. Those are two of the very few states that we have what are called parity laws with mental health and telemental health and internal medicine. So we're a state that if you live in an area like in Lake Havasu City where you're more than 25 miles away from a provider service, for example, mental health, psychologist, licensed clinical social worker, that kind of thing, we can access virtual medicine. So, you look at the provider on your phone and have a virtual visit, and we're allowed to have initial visits, so first-time visits by phone, and that's paid at the same amount by the insurance company, whether it's Access or any other insurance company, the same as if the patient was in a doctor's office. It's called a face-to-face visit now, if you can see them on the phone. And all of those laws are in place now, and Arizona was one of the first states that actually passed a law that said you can't have a limited, so they can't restrict the number of visits for mental health to be less than what it is for any other type of visit. So that's something that has always been a shortfall and something that we've desperately needed in our town because we just don't have enough providers here. So we're more than 25 miles away from them. We can call them, and there are several programs now that are being actively recruited to schools for not only telemental health providers but also nurses. And so that's something that I would encourage you to look at, and I'd be happy to give you the information I have.
Thank you. Well, we've gotten a lot of great suggestions so far. We've gotten a lot of good questions as well. Sometimes you've stumped us, and sometimes you have given us really good food for thought on directions we should be looking at, things we should be considering. But we still have a couple of open mics, and we're still happy to take any more that you can give us. Come on down.
We can't.
Yep.
Thank you. This way the people not in the building can hear.
I'm Rachel Charette. I teach at Jamaica. I'm just wondering, is there like a recommended number of the lockdown drills that we do and soft lockdowns versus hard lockdowns? Fire drills, of course, are practiced starting at a young age, even at personal houses. And of course, teachers are more comfortable and feel safe when they know what to do. And then we pass on our anxiety, I guess, to our students. So is there, I know there's not a magic number, but is there a recommendation that you would suggest for us, or as a school or a district?
I can speak to what is required. We are required to have 2 or what we call lockdown drills, 2 shelter in place, and 2 evacuation drills on top of the monthly required fire drills. One of those evacuations, a fire drill can count as that. So we as a district do try to make sure those are happening on a semester basis and quarterly, where they are rotating those through. And again, depending on an incident, they may have more than that, but those are things that we do have to make sure are happening on a regular basis.
Okay. Still got the open mics. Going once, going twice. All right.
If if I may mention, we will keep the safety@lhusd.org email open. So if you have questions or if you have further suggestions, we'll be checking that, and that will inform our continued work on our safety plans.
Okay. We'd like to thank you for coming out this evening. We know that it takes your time, and if you're watching online, we'd like to thank you for tuning in at Havasu Online TV. I'd like to thank them for making this possible, for this to be broadcast for those of us who didn't want to actually venture out in the heat this evening. We will be having our next board meeting August 21st. It'll be over at the district office. They start at 6 p.m. We encourage you to come and see what we do outside of this forum. And with that, any further announcements? Then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Yes.
John Maston?
Yes, and thank you again for coming. We are adjourned.